Hey guys, Tab here. I hope you're all doing well. Back again with another McLaren update. It's been a while since I've covered McLaren. In this video, we're going to be looking at McLaren themselves, find out what's been happening and what hasn't been happening, because it's been honestly a little bit quiet. But are they still going to be an ongoing financial concern through 2024? In this video, we will be looking at some facts and figures, trying to understand where McLaren are at in terms of their strategy, how much impact they're currently having in the market, and just what is happening with the brand from a car release perspective, because it has been perhaps a little bit quiet, to say the least. So I think the thing to start with here is the Artura. It is McLaren's latest attempt at a supercar, mass-produced supercar. Yes, there's been some limited editions, such as the rather mad Solus, but the Artura is the car that McLaren was hoping would be a raging success. And unfortunately, it's not looking like it has been. Now, if I approach McLaren and ask them for sales figures on the Artura, I'm pretty sure I'd be told that is indeed private information. So what can we do to try and find out just how well it's doing? Well, in the UK, we can look at the DVLA license database to understand a pretty accurate representation, by the way, of just how many vehicles are out there on the road. So I did just that. And we've only got data here going up to June of this year, so it's not too out of date and well after the release date of the Artura. But it doesn't give us an accurate representation through autumn and into winter. And what can we see if we look at this? Well, we can see that there are 117 Arturas on the road. I've left Swans out because it was pretty much a handful. But what we don't know, unfortunately, is which of these are press cars, registered at dealers, and which are actually out on the road being used by paying customers. Now, the Artura is a fantastic car, but it's not been without its challenges, its issues, its little things that have kind of got in the way. And I say little, thermal incidents, as they've been known, have not been great indeed. We just saw one in Leeds that unfortunately had quite a severe thermal incident. And luckily, those guys were able to get out okay. But it has had its issues. And here's what I think has happened. Yes, they wanted to get the car ready before its release, but it was released too soon. And what you probably find is that the accountants, those bean counters inside McLaren, have said, look, you need to get this thing out of the road. So there was probably a big struggle between engineering, R&D, and the accountants in terms of this car's representation, its positioning into the market sooner than we would have liked. I think McLaren would like to have had absolutely everything ironed out before getting this car out onto the road. Now, those people I speak to who do have an Artura have said that with each subsequent software update, that car gets better and better. So it's definitely headed in the right direction, but being released too early could have indeed caused it reputational damage that has an impact on those figures. What should we compare it to? Well, let's compare it to, of course, the Ferrari 296 GTB. Very similar platform to the Artura. Both have V6s, both have hybrids. Those folk who I know who have a 296 have said that it is the closest thing to a McLaren feel that they've ever had in any Ferrari, which is great because McLaren driving feel, let's face it, it is still the best out there, certainly in my book anyway. So the 296, if we have a look at those figures, there are currently 288 of those on the road. And if you look at the curve on the graph showing the data that I put together for you, you will see that the curve, that ramp, is steep and consistent, unlike the Artura, which is a little bit wavering, right? So that tells me that demand for the 296 is consistent, clear, and customers want it and are taking it. Now, the funny thing with both these cars is they both had a very similar recall issue for fuel hoses. So the 296 was subject to an America's national NHTSA, whatever it's called, recall, because that fuel hose could become damaged and present a fire risk. And with the Artura, you found that high pressure fuel hose was popping off because they were using substandard bolts because they couldn't get the proper parts because of supply chain issues that we saw, I'm guessing, during COVID. So Both cars are subject to pretty much the same issue. Fuel leak, hose, cause fire, not good, too hot, get out car. So both cars are subject to a very similar issue, but the sales figures, well, I say sales figures, but the DVLA database, registered new cars, is still looking very good for that 296. And here's the other thing. We've got to look at the two companies from a financial performance perspective, right? Ferrari, as I understand, I think is still the most profitable per car manufacturer out there in the world. So they have got it absolutely licked from a business perspective, which is great, and kudos to them. And I know the 296 has had issues. You see it on forums, people you speak to as well. But from what I hear, they're dealt with swiftly, efficiently, and quickly. Customers can put their faith into Ferrari that any issues they have are going to be dealt with like that, super fast, super quick. And that's what you want when you're spending those kind of figures on a car, let alone something like a Ford Fiesta, for example. So that is part of the battle now. Look at McLaren. McLaren as an ongoing or a going concern right now from a business perspective, it doesn't look great. I believe last year, according to a Telegraph article, that losses for the company doubled to about £349 million, which is a lot of dollar. That is apparently 140,000 deficit per vehicle produced. And this is all money that needs to go into things that are going to make the whole experience better. And those things are things, for example, like the aftercare experience, customer service, which is oh so important. And this, I think, is where it's perhaps been a little bit lacking from a McLaren perspective. People just not getting the service and treatment they need when, God forbid, something goes wrong with their pride and joy car. And this puts a dent in the reputation and then can kind of make people look elsewhere, unfortunately. So you have this situation with the two very different approaches that you see from Ferrari, absolutely smashing it, getting everything right, and McLaren, perhaps, the car's absolutely smashing it for sure, but not the overall experience, which is something that needs to be fixed, because if there was no issue at all there, people would just be jumping into those cars left, right, and centre. Now, the other piece as well is, of course, depreciation. We'll get on to that in a bit. But looking at McLaren as a going concern, so McLaren is pretty much 2/3 owned now by what is called the Mumtalakat holding company, which sits in Bahrain. And kudos to Khalid Al-Ramahi, who is the CEO for that fund, and obviously very, very passionate about McLaren. Now, at Bahrain, they have a GP now that started in, I think, 2004 with Abu Dhabi, following on in 2009. Now you've got, of course, Saudi Arabia and Qatar in the mix. I think Qatar recently, where all the drivers caught fire pretty much because it was so hot. I wouldn't like to do that, I don't think, but yeah. So, it's a real big thing out there, and you've got McLaren F1 absolutely smashing it right now, which is great. So it really does help the brand when you have an F1 team that is doing well. You get this kind of trickle-down effect. Oh yeah, McLaren, they're absolutely killing it. Gets people excited about the brand again, even though McLaren F1 are pretty much a separate ring-fenced entity inside the McLaren group. The McLaren F1 team fully self-funded, don't need any financial injection, but the automotive group needing huge cash injections. I think 350 million or so already this year has been injected. And then also you've got a situation where they're going to need a lot more funding to get through the next 12 months successfully, because I just don't think they're selling enough cars right now. So this is one of the challenges that you've got with McLaren, but you could almost kind of see it as a kind of private personal project for the Mumtalakat holding company, because they're so keen on the brand and the car. I guess otherwise why would they invest? So big respect to them for their continuing support. Let's look at what else is happening with McLaren right now from an automotive, from a car perspective. So we also have The 750S, which is dropping right now, just dropped and is being shipped, I understand, to some customers. But is it enough? Is it enough right now? I know my local dealer had 10 slots for the Spider and 10 slots for the Coupe. Apparently they've all sold out, so there is demand for these cars. But it's a hard one because it's pretty much a 720S, right, with a few tweaks, things like the accumulators. So it should be a much better platform in terms of its stability and reliability than the early 720 was, because they know this platform by now. They know what the issues were. They've got it all sorted out. Should be an awesome car. But it's a lot of money. You're probably looking at about 300K plus for a fully spec'd car. You can kind of get that for half price in a 720, right? For sure, might not be quite as polished, quite as crisp around the edges, but it's still a very good car for the money. So that depreciation is a struggle. And this is what makes the 750 hard to sell. And also, of course, you've got the 765 LT. That 765 LT is, for me, the one to get. It's limited edition. It's still holding its value very well, even though it's creeping down a little bit. There's minimal of those made, and it's really desirable. People, that is the one that people want. So while that's out there, the 750S for me is quite a hard proposition, quite a hard pill to swallow in terms of its positioning, where it kind of sits. But McLaren haven't necessarily been the best at that. What is next as well? So we're hearing rumours that the successor to what will either be the ultimate P1 or perhaps the next Super, so the replacement for the current 720, 750, 765, that platform will be dropping soon. And we think it's going to be a V8 or V6 hybrid. We just don't know yet, but more details on that to follow. I'll probably do another video on that when we hear information. Now, if we look also at history, we've got to look at some history here. History provides great context, I think, and let's look at the release of the 570 and the 720. We've got the data here for registrations since that car was released. So the 570 started to drop in 2015, and the 720 sort of 2017-ish, there or thereabouts. But look at the ramps here that we've got. So the 570 was very similar in its kind of meandering up to the Artura, from what I see in this graph. So a very similar path of cars being made and purchased. Now, is this because of the factory's ability to keep up with demand? I'm not sure, because we know they were producing more cars than they needed to. Could just be down to purchases. But the 570 versus the 720 had a much steeper ramp curve because it was such a great car, such a cool looking car. The demand for that was very good. But look what happens to both of those as we hit sort of 2018. It really levels out a bit. Then there's a little peak, and then of course we get into 2019 where it really starts to level out, right? And this is before COVID, and this is when you started to see some crazy offers drop for the 570 and for the 720. These cars were practically being given away, and this is very much the reason why I got into a 570, which I loved. It was absolutely brilliant. And yeah, who says my McLaren days are over? May well get back into one soon, but this is exactly the challenge that you've got. So you had this situation where I think sales were stalling a little bit. They provided all these incentives, and then sales picked up a little bit. But the challenge is that it didn't do well for residuals of those cars. I think the best thing McLaren could do is, if they want a better positioned car, they want to sell more, is just to lower the MSRP of their cars a little bit, which is going to make the whole process a bit easier, potentially letting them sell more cars, level up depreciation a little bit. I think it's when a car is perhaps overpriced that you see the significant hit on depreciation. And now we are in a very different situation. The whole market is tanking across the board. Supercars, EVs, normalized cars, the used cars, the values are decreasing. Even GT4 RS, which I thought was immune, right? And GT3s, they are seeing a significant hit as well. GT4 RS, I think, is back down, getting closer to list versus the hugely inflated prices that you normally see for those. So, those halcyon days of really crazy values for cars, could they be over right now? Also, interest rates through the roof. So you're going to get to this situation, I think, where sales start to stall across the board. And manufacturers need to provide and incentivize those to get people on board with their cars. And to do that, they're going to have to provide offers. So will we start to see that with the Artura? From my mind, the Artura could be probably benefited from a complete re-release at some point, because I think it just, the whole release of that wasn't right. The hype curve was lost, and you just kind of in this situation now where it's potentially floundering a little bit. So there's quite a lot to do there, but it is a very different situation now. So will McLaren continue to be an ongoing concern through 2024? Let's hope so. I really do hope so. I love the brand, and I think it will, courtesy of the very deep pockets of and generosity of Khalid Al-Rumahi from the Mumtalakat Investment Fund, which now have that majority stake after the purchase of shares from the Saudi Public Investment Fund and the Ares Investment Fund. So, taking further ownership, consolidating their ownership, that majority stake increasing. So it's obviously a great project for them, close to their heart. I hope they continue to invest in it. The F1 situation, I think, is certainly going to help with that. If that team's doing well, it's going to amplify and accentuate. But McLaren are going to have to do a lot in the next year or so in terms of customer service and cars being released and dropped into the market that are attracting the attention of potential buyers. Well, keep you updated. Thank you very much for watching. If this was interesting, do like, do sub. Very much appreciated. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.